Welcome to Too Fond of Books. My name is Janelle and this is another March Mystery Madness video. I have been loving March Mystery Madness. I love mysteries anyway, but an excuse to just gobble up more in 1 month and to talk about it with other people who love mysteries and to watch booktube videos about from other people who love mysteries has just been so much fun. And especially now, during this crazy time in which we are living, it has been nice to escape into some of these favorites and to find new favorites. And so I hope you've been enjoying these videos and that they've been allowing you to escape for a bit and to get your mind off some of the troubles. So today's video, I'm going to attempt to answer the question, what did mysteries look like before the rise of the fair play mystery during the Golden Age? But first, I need to give you the answer to yesterday's My March Mystery Madness mind bender. The clue was, this protagonist is synonymous with private detectives and features in 7 books published between 1939 and 1950. And the answer is Philip Marlowe. Of course, the writer is Raymond Chandler, and I'm going to insert a picture of some Philip Marlowe books here. Stay tuned to the end of the video for the next My March Mystery Madness mind bender. So, what did mysteries look like before the rise of the fair play mystery during the Golden Age? And I think that's a good question, and I really enjoyed looking into that and doing a little bit of research. So, in order to answer that question, I think we need to all be on the same page. What is a fair play mystery? A fair play mystery is one in which the author must play fair with the reader. So that means all the clues need to be given so that the reader can attempt to solve the mystery before the solution is given at the end of the book. The reader needs to know everything that the detective knows in the story, and there's no cheating, so no, sudden supernatural solution to the mystery. So that's essentially what a fair play mystery is. What did they look like then before the rise of the fair play mystery during the Golden Age? Most people agree the Golden Age is kind of that time period between the wars. And so most mysteries before that time, before the rise of the fair play, were short stories. And that's just how most of them were written. And most of those short stories were written initially in magazines. They came out in magazines before they were published maybe as a group of them in a book. So in Martin Edwards, in The Story of Classic Crime in 100 Books, has this to say about these short stories. Holmes and his rivals were seen at their best in short stories. After Wilkie Collins' masterpiece The Moonstone appeared in 1868, only a handful of first-rate British detective novels were published in the next 30 years. Crime writers had not learned how to combine a memorable detective capable of solving a series of baffling crimes with the form of a novel. A short story can succeed through a single trick. The length of a detective novel demands a complicated plot or development of character, or both. So most of the stories that were written during that time period were short stories. So here are some examples. G.K. Chesterton wrote the Father Brown stories. This is The Innocence of Father Brown from 1911. And every single Father Brown story was a short story. And then of course you've got classic Sherlock Holmes. Now there were a number of Sherlock Holmes novels, maybe only 4, I think. The vast majority of Sherlock Holmes stories were short stories. And this was a later one. This is the case book of Sherlock Holmes. This is from 1927. But I wanted to highlight this one because there was this great message that Holmes sent to Watson in The Adventure of the Creeping Man. It was one Sunday evening early in September in the year 1903 that I received some of Holmes' one of Holmes's laconic messages. Come at once if convenient. If inconvenient, come all the same. S.H. And I love that. You also had The Thinking Machine. This is from 1905, and the author is Jacques Futrelle. He is an American writer, and The Thinking Machine is a detective whose actual name is, now this is amazing, Professor Augustus S.F.X. Van Dusen. No wonder we call him The Thinking Machine. That is quite the name. But these are a great series of short stories, again, about this detective. He's probably most famous for The Problem of Cell 13. If you've never read any Thinking Machine stories, I highly recommend them. They're great. And Jacques Futrelle, he died young. We could have had so much more, but he actually died on the Titanic. And then we also have The Old Man in the Corner stories by the Baroness Orczy, who famously wrote The Scarlet Pimpernel, but she also wrote quite a number of mysteries, and one series of short stories that she wrote was The Old Man in the Corner, or The Teahouse Detective. This is from 1905, and our character, Polly Burton, is a journalist at the Evening Observer, and she meets this man in a tea house, and he solves crimes without ever leaving his chair at the tea house. And so that was kind of the Baroness Orczy's device in this book, is have a detective who never leaves the tea house. And of course, Polly Burton, who is his Watson, and she goes out and does the legwork. And then I also have this Detection by Gaslight, 14 Victorian detective stories. And I wanted to read from the introduction because I thought this was really interesting. The author here, this is a Dover Thrift edition, calls it the first golden age of detective fiction. The opening of the first golden age of the detective story can be precisely dated. It began when the Strand magazine published in its July 1891 issue the first Sherlock Holmes short story, A Scandal in Bohemia. The creation of a young doctor named Arthur Conan Doyle, Holmes had already appeared in two short novels, A Study in Scarlet, 1887, and The Sign of Four, 1890. Together, the novels had given flesh and blood to the characters of Holmes and Watson, but as unified tales, they were unsatisfactory. Both began with a fairly short detective adventure, but concluded with a lengthy and quite independent novel to explain the motives for the crime. And those motives had little to do with everyday life, associated as they were with the Andaman Islands and the Mormon conspiracies. Brackets. Mormons, like communists in more recent times, could always be trotted out to put a scare into late century Victorians. It was only with the introduction of Holmes into the short story form that the image of the great detective came to dominate mystery fiction. This genre had its roots in the short story, starting with the cases of Edgar Allan Poe's C. Auguste Dupin, but Dupin was a reasoning machine rather than a personality. The detectives created by Wilkie Collins, Sergeant Cuff in The Moonstone, and Anna Catherine Greene, Mr. Gryce in the Leavenworth case, were much more believable, but they both needed full novels to display their skills. Furthermore, for the short story to become the most popular way to present a mystery, the magazines in which these stories first appeared had to change from the stodgy products of mid-Victorian times with tiny type and clumsy illustrations. When George Newnes founded the Strand in 1891, he looked for his readers among the burgeoning middle classes. To draw them in, he included an illustration on every page, plenty of human interest articles, and short fiction for both children and adults. The Strand was an immense success, especially after the Holmes stories began to appear. The short form demanded by the magazine was ideal for Doyle's talents. It forced him to concentrate on the unraveling of the mystery rather than on the extraneous, exotic story of what had caused the crime. Doyle's great detective, with his near infallibility, his eccentricity, and his humanity, was perfect in the short form. A problem was presented, a few deductions revealed to the admiring Watson, the pair dash to the scene of the crime, show the foolishness of the police, make a few more deductions, and solve the crime, all in around 10,000 words. It is remarkable that until his final Holmes stories, Doyle was able to provide a great variety in the crimes and the details of the investigations, while placing everything into the wonderfully realized world of hansom cabs, London fogs, gasogens, railways, and many of the other elements of late Victorian England. The Strand was followed by many other magazines, Windsor, Royal, Ludgate, Harmsworth's, Castle's, Pearson's, and so on, which catered to the same market and which published the same sort of material. Sherlock Holmes likewise was followed by many other detectives. Sometimes the arrival of a new sleuth was directly associated with Holmes, as when the Strand published Arthur Morrison's cases of Martin Hewitt to replace the Holmes stories after Doyle sent his detective over the falls at Reichenbach. More often, however, authors created detectives who were noticeably different from Holmes, but who nonetheless could share the great detective aura. Detection by Gaslight demonstrates how varied the short mystery, and especially its hero or heroine, could be. For example, Catherine L. Purkis, George R. Sims, and others invented women detectives. Others introduced clerical sleuths, most notably Silas K. Hawking's Latimer Field and G.K. Chesterton's Father Brown. Writers of the highest talent, such as Rudyard Kipling, were attracted to the form, as were authors whose talents were minimal. For example, Headon Hill, one of those few notable tales, is included in this book. The form could be stretched to include pure scientific detection, as with R. Austin Freeman's Dr. Thorndyke, and to investigators into the paranormal, as with K&H Pritchard's Flaxman Lowe. An examination of the monthly magazines of the Victorian and Edwardian eras leaves the reader with the feeling that almost every profession could produce a detective, from the woman reporter created by the Baroness Orczy to the butterfly collector who investigates a crime in a story by Robert W. Chambers. Detection by Gaslight is a tribute to those days when Sherlock Holmes and his contemporary sleuths dominated fictional crime, when, as the great bookman Vincent Starrett wrote, "It is always 1894. So, they mentioned the Strand magazine, where a lot of these stories first came out, or other magazines like it. And so I wanted to show you this. I have this collection of the Strand magazine. This is from 1904, and it's the months of July to December. I was so excited to find this. So here's the page, the Strand magazine, an illustrated monthly, 1904, and of course it has the stories from the return of Sherlock Holmes. So, some notable exceptions to the short story format are, of course, the full-length novels of Sherlock Holmes. This is A Study in Scarlet. But you also have The Leavenworth Case by Anna K. Greene. This was mentioned in that introduction that I read. And this is a Detective Club edition from Collins Crime Club are reissuing some of these. And she wrote this in 1878. And I just wanted to show what it looks like without the dust jacket, because I think these are just gorgeous. Look at that. So the Leavenworth Case, by Anna K. Greene. And of course The Moonstone by Wilkie Collins, that was also mentioned. So then we get the birth of the Golden Age. So we're back to the story of classic crime in 100 books. The detective short story was giving way to the detective novel, as crime writers struggled with the challenge of maintaining suspense and an air of mystery for the whole length of a novel. They experimented with techniques that their successors would refine. The significance of these developments went far beyond much increased word counts. The genre was undergoing a metamorphosis that opened up opportunities for a brand new type of crime writing. And Martin Edwards claims the catalyst for the Golden Age was this book, E.C. Bentley's Trent's Last Case, which was written in 1913. In The Golden Age of Murder, Martin Edwards says this: in 1910, Bentley decided to write a detective story of a new sort. He intended a swipe against a lack of realism in the portrayal of fictional great detectives like Holmes. Quote, "It should be possible, I thought, to write a detective story in which the detective was recognizable as a human being." End quote. His aim was to make the hero's hard-won and obviously correct solution of the mystery turn out to be completely wrong. Why not show up the infallibility of the Holmesian method? Readers took Trent's Last Case at face value, not caring that it was meant to be, quote, "not so much a detective story as an exposure of detective stories," end quote. The book became an immediate and enduring success and has been filmed 3 times. Bentley did more than mock literary convention. He stumbled across a format for the twisting mystery, a blend of game-playing and mental gymnastics that still fascinates readers in the 21st century. His groundbreaking experiment inspired a new generation of writers who turned to detective fiction once the war to end wars was over. They found that the length of a novel offered much greater scope for elaborately plotted whodunits. Sherlock Holmes and Father Brown, as well as Martin Hewitt, Thorpe Hazel, and Lady Molly, enjoyed their finest hours in short stories. The plots were too slender to sustain full-length novels. In the age of detection club members during the Golden Age, in the hands of detection club members during the Golden Age, the novel at last became the natural form for the detective story. It has remained so ever since. And so some early fair play books, kind of from the birth of the Golden Age. We have J.S. Fletcher's The Middle Temple Murders from 1919, and this is again a detective club, and so it has this gorgeous cover underneath the book jacket. There we go. Freeman Will's Crofts, The Cask from 1920, and it also has that beautiful, beautiful cover. And The Bravo of London by Ernest Bramah from 1934. Now, what's interesting with this one is Ernest Bramah wrote the Max Carados short stories. Max Carados was a blind detective whose stories by Ernest Bramah appeared from 1914 alongside Sherlock Holmes in the Strand magazine, in which they often had top billing. Described by George Orwell as among the only detective stories since Poe that are worth rereading. The 25 stories were collected in 3 hugely popular volumes, culminating in a full-length novel, The Bravo of London, 1934, in which Carados engages in a battle of wits against a fiendish plot that threatens to overthrow civilization itself. So, that was just a kind of a brief look into what the mystery stories looked like before the birth of the Golden Age. I hope you enjoyed that. Have you read any of these early mystery stories, early detective stories? Do you have favorites? Are you a Sherlock Holmes fan, or do you like some of the maybe more obscure ones, like The Old Man in the Corner, or The Thinking Machine? So I'd love to hear about that. Put it down in the comment section down below. I'd love to chat about early detective fiction with you. Here is the next My March Mystery Madness Mindbender. The villain in this short story mailed the seed of a fruit to his victims. Put your answers down in the comment section down below, and I will see you tomorrow for another March Mystery Madness video. Bye!